This video will help you finding the domain and range. Let's start with reviewing the definition of domain and range. So domain, all it means is what are all your possible x or your input values. And since we're talking about the input values, we know it's this axis right here, the horizontal axis. And we know that the negatives, if this is the origin right here, that the negatives are on the left side and the positives are on the right side. So we're going to always read our domain values from the left to the right. Okay, so then we have range. Range means what are all your possible output values. So the range is your y-axis or your vertical axis. So we know that if we have the origin right here, that we have all the positive numbers up here and all the negative numbers down here. So just like here, we go from the negatives to the positives, so we go left to right. So since the y-axis or the vertical axis goes up and down, we always go from the bottom to the top when we read our graph. We always go from the negatives to the positives, so from the bottom to the top. All right, let's take a look at our first example here. First of all, let's review. It says, is it a function? For it to be a function, every x can only have one y. So that means if I draw a vertical line anywhere on the graph, it only touches it at one point. So since no matter where I draw a vertical line, it only will touch the graph at most one time, then we know that it is a function. So yes. Okay, so now our domain, and I'm going to go ahead and use interval notation for this video. So for our domain is always from the left to the right. So for this video, I'm going to put L to R, left to right. So if we look at the graph on the left side over here, on the left side of the graph, the arrow will go infinitely to the left. It's just going to keep going and going and going. So for our domain, we're going to have negative infinity. And then as we go to the right side of the graph, it goes infinitely, keeps going and going and going to the right side. So positive infinity. And remember, we always put parentheses around our interval. If it has an infinity, we always put parentheses around the infinity symbol. Okay, so now we're going to talk about our range. Our range is always from the bottom to the top. So if we look at the graph at the bottom, the arrows go infinitely downward. So since at the bottom of this graph here, the arrows are going downwards infinitely, our range is going to have negative infinity. And then as you look up on the graph stops right here. It doesn't ever go into this red area over here. So that means the highest, if this is the y-axis right here, that the highest y value is here. And that y value of that point, that y value there, that output value is 3. So we're going to put a 3 and then we're going to put a bracket. Now the reason why we're putting a bracket is because there is a point that's a solid point right there. There is no open circle at 3. So that is our range. Let's go ahead and try another one. So first of all it asks, is this a function? So if I draw a vertical line here, it touches the graph once. But since I found a spot right here where it touches the graph more than once, I know that it is not a function. So no. All right, now our domain. We look at the graph from the left to the right side. So if we look over here at the left side of the graph, you will notice that the graph will never go to the left. In this red area here, the graph never will go over here. So the lowest x value is right here. And that x value right there, that point right there is -8, 0. So the x value is -8. So my domain, I'm going to have -8, and I'm going to put a bracket around it because there is a solid point right there. And then if we go to the right side of the graph over here, the graph will never go in this blue area right here. So the highest value right here that the graph will extend to, that point right there is at 8, 0. So the highest x value is 8, and the lowest one is -8. And we're going to put a bracket because it's a solid graph. The graph is solid. Okay, so now the range, we go from the bottom to the top. So from the bottom, the graph will never go down here in this pink area. So the lowest point on this graph right there is at 0, -5. So since the range represents the output, it's the second number. So the lowest value on this graph is -5. And we're going to put a bracket around it because there is a point right here at -5. Now we go to the top. If we go to the top, the graph never goes in this blue area right here. So the highest point on this graph is at 0, 5. So since this is the range, we're looking at the 5 for the range. So we're going to put comma 5, and we're going to put a bracket because there is a point at 5. Okay, let's take a look at this example. So it asks, is it a function? So if I draw a vertical line anywhere on this graph, it can only touch at most once. Touches only once. If I draw a vertical line here, it only touches once. So no matter where I draw a vertical line, it only touches once. So that is how we know it is a function. So we would say yes. Okay, now the domain is from the left to the right side. So if we look at the left side of the graph, it has this arrow and it says it's going to infinitely keep going out to the left. So our domain is going to be -infinity. Then as we go to the right side over here, we go to this side of the graph, it also has an arrow, and this arrow means it's going to keep going out to the right. So we're going to put infinity there. Now we're going to look at the range. So the range is from the bottom to the top. So if we look at the bottom, this graph is going infinitely to the bottom, down. It's going infinitely down. And as you look at the graph, it's going infinitely to the top. Okay, let's take a look at this example here. So first of all, is it a function? So if I draw a vertical line, no matter where, every x has only one y. It passes the vertical line test. No matter where I draw a vertical line, it only hits the graph once, so it is a function. Okay, now for the domain is from the left to the right side. So if you look at the graph on the left, it's going infinitely towards the left. And then so we're going to have -infinity. And then as we go to the right side, it's going infinitely towards the right. So that means that our domain would be -infinity to infinity, because it's going infinitely to the left and infinitely to the right. Now for the range, we look at the graph from the bottom to the top. So if we look at the bottom of the graph, it's going infinitely down. And as we go to the top of the graph, if we look at the top, the graph will never go in this red area here. So in other words, this point right here is the highest the graph goes, and that point is at -2, 4. Well, the range is only concerned with the y values, or the second value, the output. So that is why we're going to put a 4 here, because the highest y value right here is 4. And we're going to put a bracket around it because there is a solid line at 4. All right, last example here. So first of all, is it a function? So no matter where I draw a vertical line, it only touches the graph once. So yes. Okay, now the domain, every x can only have, the domain is all the possible x values. So if we look at the graph, we got to go from the left to the right. So if we look at the left side of the graph, there's no arrow here. So it stops right here. It doesn't ever go left of that point there. Well, that point towards the most left is at -4, 0, that point right there. Well, the domain is only concerned with the first number, the x. So we're going to start at -4, and we're going to have brackets because there's a solid circle right here. There's a solid point there. And then as we go to the right of the graph, it's just going to go infinitely to the right. So we're going to have positive infinity here. Okay, now we're going to talk about the range. So the range is talking about, we got to read the graph from the bottom to the top. So from the bottom to the top. So if we look at the bottom of the graph never goes down here in this blue area. The lowest point the graph ever goes is right here. And that point is at -4, 0. That's the lowest point on the graph. But since we're doing the range is only concerned with the y value, the second number. So we're going to start with 0, and we're going to put a bracket around it because there is a solid point. This point right here is on a solid circle, a solid line. And then if we look at, so for the domain, it's from the bottom to the top. So as we go to the top of the graph, so we go to the top, it's just going infinitely up towards the top. So that would be our range. Now we have a couple of review problems right here. We have, what is f of -4? So remember what f of -4 stands for? It's saying use function f, and instead of x, go to -4. So -4 is right here. And it's asking you, when x is -4, what is the output right here? So that point has an output of 0. So we would put 0. Now let's do the next one. The next problem is to find f of -3. So that is saying when our x value is -3, 1, 2, 3, it's asking us what is the y value. So right here, when our ordered pair is -3 for the x, the y value is 1. So we would get 1. All right, last one. Let's say we're trying to find f of 0. So this is saying when you go to the x, and the x is 0, so right here at the origin, it's asking you what is the y value. So this point right here has an ordered pair of 0, 2. So when x is 0, the output is 2. So we would get 2.